the meeting and Bill, and ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Representative Crawford.
Here.
Representative Hurst. Representative Jackson.
Here.
Representative Bolton.
Here.
Representative Gracie. Representative Easterbrook.
Here.
Representative Fiddler. Here. Representative Fincher.
Here.
Representative Hammond.
Here.
Representative Ingram.
Here.
Representative Campbell. Representative Oliver. Representative Smith.
Here.
Representative Standridge.
Here.
Representative Travis.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Okay, we'll call HB 509 to the floor, and the sponsor is there, and tell us a little bit of what you're doing before we start the public hearing.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Committee members. House Bill 509 is gonna, try to do two things. The first thing is it will establish the deer process are possessed or purchased by a licensee or the personal property of that licensee. These are animals that are purchased and cared for by these individuals, and feel like that should be the personal property of those people. Secondly, the bill would prohibit state agency from killing, testing, and prohibiting the transfer of these deer due to disease except under certain circumstances. I do understand we have a public hearing, Mr. Chairman, and what I would like to do was reserve my comments till the end of that public hearing if possible, with your permission.
Everything.
Thank you.
And then there may be questions at the end for you too.
Yes, sir.
Okay, we have 9 people signed up for going session at 4, so we'll do 4 minutes per person, 4 minutes, and it'll move quickly. And can you keep the time? And time's up. It's the end of the public hearing. And just raise your hand when the time's up until the person recognizes you. And then if you're in the middle of the sentence, we'll allow you to quickly end that and whatever. Now we're going to start with Cameron Odom. Sir, come on up.
Afternoon, Mr. Chairman, committee members. Appreciate y'all's time. My name is Cameron Odom. My wife, Jacqueline, and I, and my family, we own and operate a deer breeding operation down in North Mobile County, Central Maryland. We started our operation back in 2015. We started with 2 bred does, and started growing our operation from there. The following year, 2016, I got 1 more bred doe and a buck, and that is about the time that the department started coming up with their SSRP, the response plan to a positive. Whenever we dug into it and got to investigating it, we felt it was extremely unfavorable toward our business, and the part the sponsor is speaking of is the killing and testing of deer due to an outside positive. And that's positive chronic wasting disease detection outside of our facility within so many miles. At the time it got presented, it would have wiped my whole herd out had one came along. So we made the decision to close our herd right then. I had 4 deer. So to say I had to go the long way around to become profitable in this business is an understatement. We grew our own herd. We didn't buy a herd. At that time, technology was coming out to breed for resistance to the disease. Technology was proven. They did it in the sheep industry with the scrapie disease. It is the sheep version of chronic wasting disease, basically the same disease. So took that technology, applied it to the deer. Basically, in a nutshell, there's 4 markers in the DNA. You got a G, you got a K, you got a H, you got a S. G being the worst, S being the best. You get one from the mama, one from the daddy. GG is the worst, most susceptible animal you can have, and that makes up the majority of the population all over the country. The goal is to breed toward an SS animal. Certain bloodlines carried that in our industry. I had my little herd tested. We were in a good spot for that. We decided to breed that way, and we've been 100% in. Couple years later, we were breeding with just a marker. A couple years later, several researchers were involved. Dr. Christopher Seabury got involved. He's a associate professor at Texas A&M, leading geneticist. He specializes in predictive genomics, and that is looking at markers in the DNA and identifying how to breed. And he does it in all industries: cow industry, sheep industry, hog industry. You can breed for certain traits and predict at almost 90% accuracy the heritability in that animal. And our deer, he's taken 50,000 markers in the codon, in the DNA makeup, and built a model and used data in that model that he received from positive farms and depopulations all over the country. And they tested upwards of 100,000 deer. And he built, and the USDA is in collaboration with that. He built the model more or less, if you looked at a number graph, 0 would be baseline. The more negative you get, the better animal you are. The more positive you get, the more susceptible that animal is to the disease. And in the beginning, Dr. Seabury, he deals in strictly in facts. He wanted us to use terms like more durable and that kind of stuff because he didn't want to say resistant yet. But
Time's up.
time's up. Boy, it was a quick 4 minutes.
It don't take long.
Anyway, I like to say one statement. There is a such thing as breeding for resistance to the disease. Deer breeders have been cast as the enemy from the beginning, that we spread the disease and all sorts of things. Deer breeders will be the cure for the disease. There's peer-reviewed, published scientific research on this. Dr. Seabury is concluding his 5-year research study, soon to be published. And you'll be able to read
All right,
that
thank you.
we can breed disease out of the deer.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Tim Gothard, Wildlife Federation.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, committee. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and be with you. I'm Executive Director of the Alabama Wildlife Federation. We're celebrating our 90th year this year, and we're the oldest and largest citizens conservation organization in the state. And the health of the deer herd in Alabama is extremely important in our organization for 2 reasons. As many of you know, the hunting industry in this state is a $2 billion plus industry. That's a big deal. It funds a lot of conservation in the state. That's important to us. The second thing that's important to us, the deer resource is a public trust resource that belongs to all of us. And that principle is extremely important to us. The Department of Conservation and Natural Resources is the designated trustee on our behalf to look after, care for, and manage wildlife in this state. And we all know that CWD is a big deal. We've all been watching it coming for a long time, and finally it has landed here in Alabama. It's going to spread more, but the more that we can keep it contained and not get further into our state, the better off we are from that public trust resource standpoint and potentially impact on our hunting industry. HB 509 would actually take away part of the trustee responsibility of the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. We don't feel like that's good. We're proud of Department of Conservation being the trustee over this resource, and we'd like to see the full set of tools remain available for them to do that trustee service to the people here of Alabama. Regarding CWD, what the bill would also do, it was to take tools out of their tool pouch to actually monitor for, detect, and manage CWD in this state. The only way that they can do their trustee responsibility, properly manage for CWD in this state, we've got to know what's going on in all sectors where white-tailed deer are in this state. In the wild, in captive breeding facilities, and in high fence hunting operations. 509 would take that ability away and leave a gap that we think is very negative for the resource, and it's something that we're very happy with the process that we have right now with DCNR having 100% ability to be that trustee that's been assigned to them, and we'd like to see that continue. So on behalf of the Alabama Wildlife Federation, I respectfully oppose 509, and I hope that you will oppose it as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Jack Crosby.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to this committee today. My name is Jack Crosby, and I had the privilege to spend many of my childhood years growing up in this building. I spent many days as a page in both chambers, observing how government was supposed to function and learning the art of compromise from many senators, including the late Senator Biddle. I also learned to stand up for what you believe in, mostly by watching the late Representative Holmes in one of his passionate speeches. But I have to admit, my parents didn't really much appreciate a 10-year-old me arguing with them like Mr. Holmes would do. Fast forward to today, and the bill before you addresses an issue for which I share that same passion. A few years ago, I became a deer farmer. It was one of the best decisions I've ever made. Deer farming is a lifestyle. It's putting in more than you take out. It's animal husbandry, and it's a profound respect for animals and Mother Nature. It's hard work and long days, but nothing compares to the satisfaction of having my boys grow up learning these same values. Unfortunately, deer farmers in our way of life have a problem. With one positive test from a deer in the wild, or even an arbitrary rule change from the Department of Conservation, our lives and livelihoods are gone. This bill does what is right. It allows us to breed for this resistance to CWD. The random killing of animals in no way helps solve the problem. The solution lies with breeders who are breeding for resistance. It takes multiple generations of breeding to achieve this resistance. Killing these animals only sets us back years. I attended my first committee meeting nearly 30 years ago. That bill legalized crossbows. I watched as hunters fought against each other. The same talking points and fear tactics that you're going to hear that are being used today are being used today. Please don't fall into that trap. The words hunting, harvest, high fence, or pets are not found in this bill. Do not let the personal emotions of a few influence your decision. I'm fortunate to be a deer farmer. I'm fortunate to live in a state where we value private property rights. This bill codifies those rights and protects our business and our way of life. Please vote in favor of private property rights. Please vote in favor of the values that my sons learn on our farm. Please vote in favor of common sense. And please vote in favor of House Bill 509. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Tosman. Aaron Beasley. Alabama County Association.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Aaron Beasley with the Alabama Cattlemen Association, and pleasure to be with y'all today. We are opposed to HB 509 as it is written. This bill, just looking at it, it would eliminate any type of enforcement mechanism by a state agency in the event of an animal disease outbreak. Just looking at this from the livestock sector alone, we operate in a condition in which, if we're looking at diseases such as tuberculosis, BSE, brucellosis, God forbid, foot and mouth disease, these are all concerns of our industry. And as livestock owners, we have a lot of precautions in place to make sure that we don't have to deal with these situations. We take for TB, for example, tuberculosis. Right now, if we have that issue take place, cattle are cloven-hoofed animals, deer are cloven-hoofed animals. We know that currently the state veterinarian can set up a quarantine zone and they can have random sampling and testing that takes place. For those cattle to move out of that quarantine zone, they'd have to test negative. That's in place. Those types of laws have been in place for decades. If we have HB 509 go into place and we have that situation, the state veterinarian doesn't have any type of mechanism to talk to DCNR so that we have, any testing going on across species. And so that is a concern for us in the livestock sector. I think about our cattle operation, we have good fences. If we were to back up to an operation where we had these deer in place, given that they're both cloven-hoofed animals, we would have a level of concern for that. I know that I would want to know if there was testing going on, and I think that the owners on the other side of my fence would want to know if there's testing going on my farm as well. Livestock industry in Alabama operates and has operated for decades with these types of laws on the books. It's served us well. It's protected our herd. And whether the animals are showing disease or random testing needs to take place, these laws have really protected our industry. Because of that, the efficiencies have allowed our $2.5 billion livestock industry to operate and function very well. So I would ask you to consider opposing HB 509, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Ann. Terry Johnson.
I'm Terry Johnson. I'm a Franklin County deer farmer. Been doing this for several years. During the December 29th or 23rd, when the regulation came down and we got the email that we couldn't move deer or anything throughout from our facilities, we took and basically lost half of our income during this time. So I just want to see this bill pushed through to take and allow us to take and be able to make private property decisions, do everything we can for our families. We have, a family farm, family of 9, so the children enjoy everything. 2 farms that I think had to take and do the mandatory testing and slaughter more than 10% of their animals. They took and had to do that. They lost thousands of dollars. So everything we can do moving forward with, like Cameron was saying, with the SS markers and the negative GEBV values, that's what every deer farmer in the state is going towards. We're working towards that. We want to take and beat this out just as much as everybody else. So, family farms, like I said, my kids love it. They dream about it. They see them every day. They're out there playing with them. We don't want to see our deer farming or rights, violated.
Thank you. Thank you. Chris Blankenship, Commissioner of Resource Conservation Natural Resource.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. Like I say, this bill has the most risk to wildlife and hunting heritage any bill that I've seen in my 31 years as a commissioner in the Department of Conservation. And I don't say that lightly. I'm not one that exaggerates. We've worked very hard with the hunters, large landowners, deer breeders, and others to limit the introduction and spread of CWD. No movement of deer into Alabama from other states, no movement outside CWD zones of harvested deer or deer parts. Mandatory sampling weekends where we've had 1,100 deer sampled in the CWD zones this year. Hunters have done their part and have been fantastic. I am on the Alabama Black Belt Adventures Board. I understand the deer breeders, the enclosures, and the lodges and the economic impact that they have on Alabama. They do have a good place in our hunting industry in the state. We've worked with the sponsor on previous deer breeder and enclosure issues where we established an entirely different deer season for them in a previous bill. The department issued a statement on this bill this week in the effort to be transparent and ensure that the hunting public and high fence owners were aware of the substantial risk to their deer populations and our hunting heritage that is threatened by this bill. I feel like we can safely manage for success for both in the deer breeding industry and in the wild hunting. Currently, we have 12 confirmed cases of CWD, and all of them are confined in northwest Alabama. If this legislation is implemented, CWD will spread rapidly, I have little doubt. There's been misinformation on that we sample within 25 miles and that we kill a flat number of 10% of deer in these facilities. That is just not true. The 10% is a sample target, and it's otherwise recommended in our consultation with Department of Ag and Industries and the Cooperative Deer Study Program. In the current case in Colbert County, there were 16 deer breeders within 25 miles approximately of the positive. We tested 1 breeder and 1 captive server within 10 miles. That's all. When the results were negative, we reopened the breeders to be able to move their deer all within the CWD zone. I believe you've been told that 100% of the deer over a year old in the deer breeder facilities are tested. That is not true. Last year, 392 deer were reported as dead, but only 271 were tested. The breeders that we sampled in Franklin County had 11 deer unaccounted for in their facility. We have no idea what happened with those 11 deer. We had no choice but to do some current surveillance sampling to find out what our prevalence was. 509 doesn't allow any agency, not just DCNR, any agency to come and do post-mortem surveillance testing of the deer for any disease, not just CWD, in a breeder facility. And only if they send the Department of Ag and Industry samples. We've worked with the Deer Breeders Association, the USDA, the Department of Ag, and the government is spending millions of dollars to develop a certified anti-mortem test, a live test. That is what we have all been working for years. This bill would not allow live deer testing for CWD at a deer breeding facility. I don't understand that at all. That is the most baffling aspect of this bill to me, that we can't even test live deer. Under this bill, we can't do a surveillance sampling on dead deer, can't do a live deer test, no testing except when the deer breeder provides the sample. And as you can see, that is not comprehensive in just that one example. HB 509 negatively impacts high fence owners and all hunters because it would allow the transfer of a possible diseased deer to any person, place, or property from a CWD zone. If this passes, a deer breeder in Lauderdale, Colbert, or Franklin County that's in a CWD hot zone could load a deer on a trailer and bring it to Covington County, Tuscaloosa County, Elmore County, Autauga County, Blount County, down in Sumter County, over in Monroe County, up to Limestone County, down in Mobile County, over in Randolph County, Washington County, Autauga County, over in Hale County, and down in Baldwin County. That is, thank you. How can that be okay? Deer are not the property of the breeder or livestock, but deer are a public trust resource, and it's been that way since 1842, when the Supreme Court ruled in that particular way. HB 509 would facilitate the spread of CWD to move more rapidly throughout all areas, instead of where it's currently contained, limit the ability of DCNR to do our statutory responsibility, and would be in conflict with more than 180 years of legal precedent to all citizens about owning a public trust resource. In closing, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, we've worked with almost every one of you on various legislation and on projects in your area. I hope you would agree that we work hard to always do the right thing, and we try to do a good job for the resource. This time is no different. We are working hard to do the right thing and to protect hunting in Alabama. I think there are a packet of letters of opposition to this bill from many groups nationally and in the state, and I'll stop there. Appreciate the extra few seconds. Thank you, sir.
Chris, since you brought this statement up, you and I have been good friends. We worked together on a lot of things in the last 7 years that I've chaired this committee. But how you worded that first paragraph, I think was very unfortunate. And it has really brought some hard feelings to not just this committee, but a lot of members and body upstairs and downstairs. When you talk about pet deer, put them in a small pen, someone shooting them, that was very unfortunate wording. You put a burden on my committee. Half of the emails or more that we have read dealt with that issue, high fence, and that ship has sailed on high fence. But I would appreciate it in the future that you don't put my committee and don't belittle industry. This high fence is an important industry in Alabama, and I think that shows some disrespect for us.
Appreciate your comments. I have no problem with high fences and enclosures. Like I said, I realize their economic value to our state and what they do. That comment was particularly about them becoming personal property, which does not fall into any other category in the law and makes them what I consider pet. But I do appreciate your criticism, and I will take that into account for future information. Thank you, sir.
Troy?
It's okay, Zach Keeney.
Zach Keeney.
Yes, sir. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee. My name is Troy Zucchini. I've been a deer farmer since 2001. I've sold deer all over all parts of the state, helped people manage their high fences. I've been a part of the monitoring program, which hasn't been talked about much since its inception through the Department of Agriculture. We are required to test 100% of the deaths 12 months of age or older that happen in our breeding operations. This bill does not affect that program at all. This is in response to if there is a positive found within 5 to 10 miles of my farm, no matter how many tests I've done or how long I've been in business, I would be required to kill 10% of the animals in my pen and get them tested. Not a live test option, post-mortem test. I would choose those animals. If we're worried about shooting them in a pen, I would be required to shoot those deer in the pen and submit those samples to the state. I don't know of any business to where you purchase an animal, you sell an animal, or you trade an animal, or anything else that you don't own. As it goes in the game breeder statute, down towards the end of the statute, the Commissioner of Conservation, in cooperation with the Department of Agriculture, may order the confiscation and destruction of any animal that is deemed to be a substantial disease risk to other wildlife, domestic animals, or the public, without compensation to the owner for such animal. Now, that's in our game breeder statute. Are they talking about not compensating the state? I'm confused. This is why game breeders feel like they already own the animals that are in our pens. To add to that, Code Section 9-2-7, the Commissioner of Conservation Natural Resources may enforce and administer all laws providing for the preservation, protection, propagation, and development of wild birds, wild fare-bearing animals, game, fish, saltwater fish, shrimp, oysters, other shellfish, crustaceans, and all other species of wildlife within the state or within the territorial jurisdiction of the state which have not been reduced to private ownership except otherwise provided. If you take these two instances into account, you can see that the game breeder statute was developed with this in mind. We own the animals, but the Department of Conservation has a certain amount of authority given to it by the legislature. Now, I'm sure I don't have to remind any of you all that the process is the statute is proposed, the legislature does not oppose it, the people who it's being enforced don't oppose it, and the Conservation Department or whatever department that has proposed it or that it requires agrees to it, and then it passes. If there's anything problem with this in there, it should have been changed. This is the way it has been since 2006. I purchased every animal that I have in my breeding operation from the time I started, and I have never accepted any deer from the wild. So as you see, this is why we feel like we own the deer, and this is why we need the codification of the ownership in the bill. If any of you all are in business, if someone were to come along and ask you to give up 10% of your inventory and then tell you that you cannot sell animals or sell your product but within a small area, how long would you be able to stay in business? I'm sorry, just one more statement. I've been doing this for a living since I started. This is the American dream that I had when I got out of college, and I've been able to support a family all this time. If the CWD regulation comes into effect in my area, I will no longer be able to do this for a living. I'll have to find another job. So thank you all. Appreciate your time.
All right, good luck.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for hearing me today. I have some prepared remarks because my wife tells me I'm long-winded, but I think it's just people aren't as good a listeners as they used to be. At any rate, I don't have a position and I don't have a title, but I have an interest. And my interest, I think, is probably your interest. It would certainly be your grandchildren's interest in the next 10 years. So I'm going to tell you today that for the past 206 years in the state of Alabama, it has provided a bounty of wild game for us, for all of its citizens. And as a deer hunter myself, I feed a lot of them every year off of this bounty. Many of the people that I fed this year really count on that nourishment. And that's a backdrop for what I want to talk to you about. You know, over the years, we've learned to safeguard our wild game resources. And we did that by adopting reasonable laws and reasonable rules and reasonable procedures. But today, HB 506, the bill that we're here to talk about and consider, is really going to fundamentally risk that future of reasonableness, my interest and yours. Because it will risk the most prolific wildlife we have in the state, the white-tailed deer. Need I remind any of you, and some of this you've heard already, of the risk of chronic wasting disease? You know, our own DNR is fighting an insurgency right now in northwest Alabama. You all are familiar with that, I'm sure. Does it really make sense that we put a rear guard action in our rear that would increase that insurgency? I don't know how many of you, I'm sure you've read the bill. I've read several times, again this morning, and I'm not sure that some of the approvers of this legislation have actually read it, because it doesn't say a lot of the stuff that I've heard already. It destroys the testing regimen and the transfer restrictions, the way I read the bill, of those diseased animals. It weakens the protective measures we already have in place to prevent the spread of a very deadly pathogen. You don't need to go very far to look at the consequences of CWD in a lot of other states, from Michigan and Wisconsin all the way down to Arizona. It weakens that protective measure in place to prevent that spread of a deadly pathogen. You know, it seems to me instead we ought to be talking about today a law that actually increases in the face of the threat, that actually increases and mandates testing and transfer of animals, even more so than we're doing today, because of the incipient threat from the northwest. But instead, what this bill seems to do is to, just like so many other legislative processes and procedures, it carves out a special provision for a special interest. So I'm up here, not with a title and not with a position, to argue that this bill is no bill that a true sportsman in Alabama needs, nor is acceptable to our own DNR. Listen to them. On behalf of the real Alabama hunters, I ask you, in all good faith, to reject this proposal. It's simple. It doesn't, in my view, go over the top. It's pretty reasonable, and it's going to be effective. Without your support, we're going to risk a lot. We're going to risk a heck of a lot for the sportsmen of the state, and for all of the economic impact that is brought into this state and resides in this state. So I'm asking you, make my interest and the interest of all the hunters in Alabama your interest with your negative vote on 506. Thank you very much. And I have a copy for the chair if you wish to have a copy of the prepared remarks.
And our last speaker, Ross Gunnels.
Mr.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for your time. I just want to address a couple of issues that have been brought up through comments today, as well as through the statement that Commissioner Blankenship mentioned earlier, that the department set out for transparency. And so one of the things in that letter says, the legislation limits the ability of the Alabama Department of Conservation and Natural Resources to adequately inspect these facilities. The game breeder regulation 220-2.138, I think it's subsection number 2, it says it should allow inspection by agents authorized by the division, that's the Division of Wildlife, Freshwater Fisheries, and Department of Agriculture and Industries of stock facilities and records at all reasonable times. This bill does not change that. There's been some other statements that says limits the ability to test for chronic wasting disease or other diseases. That same regulation, number 10, it says for species of the family Cervidae, obtain a premise registration number and comply with conditions set forth in any herd health or monitoring plan that may be designated by the Alabama Department of Agriculture and Industries. That chronic wasting disease animal monitoring program, I assume that the Alabama Department of Ag and Industries developed this to actually monitor for and detect chronic wasting disease in herds. As you heard earlier, this plan right here, which is a condition of licensure that has to be renewed annually, as well it has to have a accredited veterinarian come and sign the paperwork that they've gone and visually inspected the herd. This requires that any cervid natural deaths that happen on that game breeder facility that are 12 months of age and older must be tested by the state, and that is paid for by the deer breeders. Therefore, that does not change in this legislation. So any allegations that this is going to decrease the amount of testing are false. Alabama's actually had, and this is probably, this monitoring program has been in effect, 15 to 20 years, I suspect. 100% of natural deaths 12 months of age or older has been one of the most rigorous monitoring programs throughout the state. There's hardly anywhere to go north of 100% of your deaths. So the bill does not change it. Bill addresses ordering the killing of animals when there's not a disease detected in that facility. And it also addresses the ante-mortem test. It doesn't say anything about post-mortem. Post-mortem in this monitoring program can continue, and the deer breeding industry actually recommends that program continue. I think that I don't want to belabor the point, but I will state this, when it talks about placing those pet deer in small pens and fences where they could be shot, there are a couple laws on the books right now that address section 911-502, hunting of tame animals is prohibited in Alabama. This legislation does not speak to hunting. The same thing, section 911-501 talks about hunting animals, game animals under certain conditions prohibited. That's kind of a canned hunting where it says the animal shall have the ability to, a reasonable opportunity to evade the hunter. So this bill does not address that. This bill is meant for breeding facilities, not hunting enclosures, and we feel that we are adequately testing and monitoring for CWD. If they find CWD, then it does not restrict the state, Department of Conservation, or any other state agency, specifically Department of Agriculture, from doing what they deem necessary up to and including depopulation. I'll be happy to answer other questions, but really I just urge you to look at the law and actually look at the legislation as written.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, President Sauls.
a lot of information, a lot of things to consider. You know, if there's one thing I have found when this bill was filed, is there was a lot of misinformation put out there, and that's troubling to me. I'm an avid hunter. I've hunted all my life. I've fished all my life, and I've always lived my life to tell the story like it is and tell the truth. And to hear the misinformation that's going on, and Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your comments on this letter that was sent out through a government medium to thousands of people all over the state of Alabama and outside of the state of Alabama. I've heard from people that have gotten phone calls from people outside the state. What's going on? But it's very troubling to me, because when I read this email, I really didn't see a department or an individual that supported what these deer breeders do and how they function and how they work. I didn't see that in this email. And I can sit here and break this email down for you, and will, if you would like for me to show you those instances in here that make me go to that thought process when I read this. It was very troubling to me.
I'm sure we got questions for you, and our time
Okay.
is gonna be short.
Okay. I would like to make one point, if I could, sir, just one point. There's two different facilities we're talking about with this. We have a breeding facility that are small, 1-2 acre pens that's where breeding stock is housed. And that's what we're talking about in this bill. You have other areas that are large acreage areas that these animals are released in for hunting purposes. You know, the smallest one I've ever run up on was about 500 acres. There's one right outside of the town I live in that's, over 1,000 acres. That's where the animals are released to hunt in. Any movement of these animals from one facility to another, my point is, any movement of these animals is from one facility to another. It's not from a facility to out in the wild. That's not happening. So these animals are staying within the facilities wherever they're moved and wherever they go.
Thank you. Mr. Jackson, do you have a question?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have questions as it relates to your bill. In the synopsis, it's asked, the question is that this bill will prohibit state agencies from killing, testing, and prohibiting the transfer of deer due to disease, except under certain circumstances. And what are those circumstances? And how can you have those circumstances without science?
Well, you have science, and I was very happy to see the gentleman that brought up the genetic markers that they're breeding into these animals to make them CWD, to where they're resistant to that. I mean, that was a very great argument, and a talking point. But what we're saying there is that I think the one gentleman spoke about if they test positive outside the fence and have a positive test, they can come inside the fence to kill those animals, to test them inside the fence. And let me say this, over the years, they've never had a positive test inside of a facility. Never had a positive test. The last number I heard were 8 positive tests outside in the wild. So, I don't know, does that answer your question?
No.
Throw your question right at me again. Let me give you another shot.
The question is, under what circumstances do you prohibit them to do it? You're gonna prohibit them from doing it. Now, under what circumstances?
Under the circumstance if they find a positive test within that facility. So you got a facility that's testing their animals, and they have a positive for CWD, then that would stop them from moving those animals.
Okay. And that is using science rather than common sense.
Yes, sir. That's science. That's a test that will be done on that animal.
Any other questions?
I guess I got a couple of questions. Currently, is there a live testing procedure that could be form. Right now, it's saying that in order, the deer has to be deceased, it's dead. Is there a live testing procedure out there right now? Maybe the commissioner
Well,
or some of
there,
them know.
there is, I have been told there is a live testing procedure. I think that it's not as accurate as the post-mortem test, but there is a live testing procedure.
And I asked that question, I asked it because, people have a lot of money invested in these. Now personally, I'm from the old school, I believe in dog hunting, so, you know, I like to run dogs. I'm just telling you, I'm from the old school. But, and so my hunting has been cut very short, but, the people that are breeding these animals have invested a lot of money in them. And I think it is, you know, if we got this type of facility, you know, we have cattle farms. If there's a epidemic found in a cattle farm, what do we do? Are we going out and killing the cattle? You know, I don't think so. I think we have ways of testing them that allows us to determine whether or not these animals have a disease. So instead of saying that we can't do anything, I'd be wanting to offer some sort of amendment at some point in time that said if it's discovered outside of the fence, then we could have those deer inside of the fence, could get them a certain portion tested, live tested, rather than post-mortem. So I'm just throwing that out to you to let you know that that's kind of where I'm thinking in terms of an amendment to hopefully, because I don't want to handicap our agencies from actually protecting the public interest. So I don't want to do that, but I also don't want to put an economic burden on these people that are in business, even small businesses usually. So just that's where I'm thinking right now, and I had.
Well, if the live test was an acceptable method to do that, I think that would be fine. And I don't know that the breeders would have a problem with that.
And see, that's what I'm thinking. At some point in time, somebody has to have some reasonable, you know, ideas about this. And I think I do think that may be something that I'd want to explore with the commissioner and with the breeders, because I think that's a compromise that could at least be used to give the public some security, as well as allow some sort of ability for our agencies to do their job also.
Well, if we do that, if that's the method that we look at doing, I don't think that breeder should be held responsible for the expense of that. So if you have a state agency coming in and requiring it, I would think the state agency would be responsible for the payment of that.
And see,
And that's
where you and I are going to disagree, because if we actually give up this post-mortem, I think then a breeder that has, and I don't know what they call it, but sell $5,000 deer, I don't know, and the cost of the test is $500. I believe a breeder would rather give us pay the cost of $500 than to have to lose a $5,000 and it end up that he doesn't have the disease in it.
I'll be very quick. Where are we on compromise? Is anybody willing to make any kind of movement towards coming to the middle?
I don't think that there's these two issues are something that can be compromised. And I think that what Representative McCampbell threw out is a great option if that's an accepted method to test. And I don't know if that's the case.
Following up on what Representative Jackson was talking about, if there was a deer that had CWD, and of course, the one deer breeder over here in North Alabama, he decides, oh, he looks a little odd, we're gonna transport him real quick and get over here and get my payment. What do we have in the industry to not do that? I know we say right here that we don't allow it, but what if you got these unscrupulous business owners and they do that? Which, following up on what Representative McCampbell just said, if we did allow testing before transport or when they transport, that way you would catch that movement. Is that reasonable?
No, it means you have to put everything to sleep to do a live test on him before you load him up. They're not pets in most cases. It's not like I put your hand on it and live testing.
You got a question too?
Yes, I have a question, for the commissioner. You said they killed 1,100 deer, tested 1,100 deer in North Alabama?
Yes, sir.
How many are tested positive?
8.
That's what percentage?
I don't know.
Less than 1%. When was your first CWD case discovered in the United States? In deer, over 75 years ago in Colorado. And Colorado and Wyoming started requiring 100% of all deer killed to be tested for CWD. They no longer require it because less than 0.5% tested positive for 50-something years. Every state that is tested for CWD in the United States has found it. The fact that we found it recently in Alabama doesn't mean that it showed up here recently. It's been here since Noah got off the ship, most likely. It's the same as scrapers and sheep. It was discovered over 200 years ago. It's in the moose in Finland. It was discovered over 200 years ago. It's in the red deer. It's in the reindeer. It's all over the world. It's caused by the prions in the salt. And all these other states that require 100% of the deer to be killed, that are killed, hunted and killed to be tested, they continue to test at less than 0.5% every year, year after year. So we're not wiping out the deer herd, and we're not spreading the disease. The disease is already here. The fact that we just started testing for it means you found it. They found it in every state they tested for. So
we're running out of time.
Is that a question? It's a statement. I think that's incorrect. The testing in 50 states has not been found in all 50 states, but anyway.
Just a quick question too.
Yes,
I think you mentioned in your remarks that some, when they were found in northwest Alabama, the diseased deer were that some deer were missing, a few of them that were in fenced-in areas. My question is, were those facilities breeding facilities or were they hunting facilities?
The particular one I thought about was a breeding facility.
A breeding facility, yes. And there were how many deer missing?
11.
These deer being sequestered in high fence facilities, it would be much less likely for them to contract the disease, it looks like. And if the deer were left there inside those high fenced areas, any chance that there was disease in there would be to the detriment of the owners of those deer. They would be the ones who would actually lose if that were the case. I guess my question is, why go in and kill the fenced-in deer, which are outside the general deer population, if there is a case within 5 or 10 miles, and I've heard both used today?
There is a chance that those deer could transmit that to the deer. It's outside. Not inside and outside, and so it is the difference is that the deer in those facilities are being moved all over the state. And so in order to allow that movement, we want to make sure that the deer are not diseased inside that facility before they move to one of your counties. And this bill,
Could there be a time prohibition for moving deer off that facility until the disease would show up?
and we do have that in our current regulation, to 5 years. And if there's no positives within 5 years, we can allow that to be moved again. Yes, sir.
Okay, one more question.
On that, what are the methods now containing, infected deer herd? Any herd?
In a facility,
In a
a deer breeding facility, an enclosure, or just in the wild, or all of the above?
Well, almost say in an enclosed facility, breeding facility.
Yeah, so if they're in a breeding facility, it's just like with avian influenza with chickens, or disease with other animals like cows. It is depopulate those facilities and not allow. That's the way it currently is now.
Okay. And in the wild, how do you handle that?
We have areas that are closed where you can't move deer out of those areas. So like the hunters can't, if they shoot a deer in one of these CWD zones, they can't move that deer out of that zone into another county or take it somewhere else where it might spread CWD. And they've been doing that since we first had the first positive several years ago, and the hunters have been really responsive to that. And this bill would allow movement of deer from breeding facilities to anywhere in the state without any testing for disease before those are transported.
So Travis, you got a quick question?
Yeah, quick question, I guess. How do you handle such situations with high fences up? I know a few years ago, tornadoes came through and the high fence was torn down, deers out in the place. How do you handle
And that is a concern. They report those as escapees, and we take them off of their inventory if they do have a fence that goes down and they move from the deer breeding facility out into somewhere that's not an enclosure. That they report those. And just one item, I think, to kind of go along with that. The way that it works now, where these are game animals, we have regulations in place to make sure that those are hunted fairly and is great. The information about changing that from where they are wild animals or game animals now to something other, which is private property or pets or something else, that is what changes the other regulations that Mr. Gunnels was talking about. Currently, we can do that. If this law changes, it trumps the regulations that we have in place. So that's why
We've got to take a vote before 4 o'clock. So there a
I'll make a
motion?
motion, we vote
There's a
now,
motion.
Chairman.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second. There wasn't a second, so
No.
we'll
Yeah.
do it.
Don't have to have a second.
Yes, you do. That's what they tell me. Okay, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, no.
No.
Ayes have it, so you have a favorable report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee.
What you got? They record all, committee meetings. You wanna look it up?
Got you. Thank you.
Yeah, we got her.